Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SCF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and the HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Ajay Shamdasani. Today we'll be examining the importance of how compliance and legal staff need to incorporate geostrategic risk considerations into the advice and recommendations they give those they serve, be they clients or in an in-house capacity. In our initial Regulatory Rambling Spotlight segment, we'll be chatting with Chad Olsen of KPMG China to discuss what professionals in Hong Kong, Greater China, and the region more generally need to know about such factors. Following that, we'll have a chat with Mark Nuttall, Executive Advisor and Strategic Deal Facilitator in Dubai, for more of a Mideast perspective. But first, with the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 under the Biden administration and the fallout that followed, along with the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 and its ongoing war, the net result has been inflationary pressures in international oil, gas, and food prices. It's roiled global markets and deeply hurt the economies of Western Europe, deprived of cheap Russian fuel, to say nothing of the human cost. One thing's for certain, it's spurred a deep interest in concepts such as geostrategy or geopolitics, what in an earlier age might have been called political and economic risk analysis, and be regarded as the remit of social scientists such as economists and political scientists and sociologists or international relations experts. Most professions and organizations are increasingly finding the need to adopt an interdisciplinary approach to problem solving because in the modern world, myopia and compartmentalization can be fatal. It's increasingly the case that in-house and general counsel and compliance staff at banking and financial institutions and multinational corporations need to be cognizant of geostrategic risk factors and advising those they report to. Joining us to discuss the matter is Chad Olsen. Based in Hong Kong, he's the head of forensic services with KPMG China. In that capacity, some of the matters he oversees are white-collar investigations, anti-money laundering, sanctions and trade control, fraud, and disputes and arbitration. Prior to that, he was a partner at Deloitte, where he was the head of financial crime. And before that, he was the head of the financial crime intelligence unit at Standard Chartered Bank. In terms of his credentials, he's a chartered accountant in Australia and New Zealand and holds 2 undergraduate degrees from Curtin University. Relevant to today's discussion, his areas of focus there were accounting and finance and political science and sociology. And with that, Chad, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Why does geostrategic / political risk analysis matter in your view to a modern compliance officer or lawyer? Why should they say this is part of my job description now rather than let's bring in a specialist?
Let me answer that with a bit of sort of perspective first and context, right? And then maybe I could directly answer the question. So look, for a start, what you refer to as geostrategic and political risks, I just simply refer to as sort of geopolitics. It's for me, it's definitely not something that's just confined to compliance and legal in the corporate space, right? In my dealings and my line of work, it's extremely transversal, right? So it actually starts at the very top, at the boardroom level, right, with strategists, economists, and even very senior consultants being engaged to help leadership of corporations shape business strategy. So my point is, it's not just compliance, right? It's much broader than that. Now, specifically about the compliance officer, it actually has everything to do, right? In this day and age, as you rightfully pointed out, the role isn't just about complying with regulations. It's about understanding why those regulations are there in the first place, right? And I'm sure the faculties are well aware of some of the more, how do I put it, stringent laws that have come in from the West, specifically around anti-bribery and AML, which were all a result of massive geopolitical and global initiatives, right? Such as the formation of FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force, as well as the U.S. government's deferred prosecution agreements on several banks, right? Which, again, brought the compliance industry to the next level. Now, so for me, in short, it's got everything to do, right? Now, it isn't something entirely new in the financial crime space specifically. So I'm now talking about a subset, right? Financial crime is a subset of compliance. And a good example is with a lot of my colleagues, actually, who work in the sanctions space, right? Because sanctions has got a direct correlation to politics. It's got a direct relation to government regulations.
And it's increasingly a profession in its own right. It's no longer just an adjunct to AML.
No, absolutely right. It's kind of taken a life of its own, right? It's quite interesting because if you sort of dissect that space slightly, you will see, this might be of interest to your faculty, particularly the law school. We're getting a special breed of compliance officers who are legally trained in the sanction space, right? And that's how specialized it is, and a lot of them go on to very specialized careers after that.
I was on the financial crime regulatory compliance beat for a number of years. And, it was clear when you looked at the three threads, governance, risk, and compliance, they weren't necessarily the same, but all three were entangled. That is to say, you couldn't have an intelligent conversation about one without bringing up the other two. And so for practical purposes, it was clear that an interdisciplinary approach was required. Same things like FATCA, FCPA, financial crime, cyber risk, all of that. And the more you got into risk, you saw, that there were flavors of risk: credit risk, counterparty risk, operational risk, the things we're used to in the financial realm. But increasingly, I started to see political and economic risk became more of a consideration in that basket. And I guess people just chalked it up to the upheavals in the world, that the world has become a more unsafe place post 9/11 in the last quarter century. And so that risk is going to be reflected in the financial bottom line. You can't just write it off, as an externality in the way, when it came to environmental externalities that weren't for the longest time factored into the value of a good or a commodity or that those things now have to be taken into account. And so it became clear that political risk was a growing part of that equation. Yeah, so I guess what I'm wondering is that if that's the case, would it make sense then to hire a political scientist or an international relations, security studies, strategic studies specialist and place them in a compliance or legal department? Because I'm seeing more and more law firms now want AML specialists, not necessarily lawyers. They want AML specialists in that law firm.
Maybe let me just tackle that last statement you made first, and then I'll kind of go back to the question. So as far as law firms are concerned, so the two reasons why they have AML specialists, sanction specialists, or for none of a better term, financial crime specialists. One reason is because they themselves are subject to regulations. So, for example, when FATF comes into town to do their mutual evaluations, they actually look at the legal industry as well, because they have their own guidelines, which require them to basically screen their own customers and so forth. And they obviously take it seriously by hiring specialists for their own internal use. Right, that's one reason. And most people forget that oftentimes. So, and the reason why I know this is quite interesting because we actually, how do I put it? As part of the talent pool, we share, we hire people from the law firms in that space and vice versa and so forth, right? The second reason is to exactly the point you made, which is that growing demand, right, for the skill and for that level of specialism, which their clients definitely need. And as you know, obviously, as a result of legal privilege and so forth, law firms are the first people that most people call when they have issues or a problem, or they need pure advice. Right. So that's what I wanted to address first. The next thing was, I think you mentioned about whether there was a need for a specific specialist to be placed in those compliance teams.
Right. Either either an economist or a political scientist or an IR
Understood.
specialist.
So given what I said earlier in terms of geopolitics not being confined to just compliance and legal, my personal view is that I find it a bit duplicative to have a specialist embedded in the compliance team purely for that, right? Now, having said that, the skills and attributes that you've just mentioned, for me, are crucial in this day and age. So the three reasons why it's crucial, and it has to be an attribute in our compliance workforce. Number one, obviously, is and you mentioned this very clearly just now. It's obviously the regulatory environment awareness. Compliance officers must be able to navigate complex and evolving regulations that can change with political shifts. Right. So the point I was trying to make is that's not just about executing or making sure there is compliance to the regulation. We need to understand the genesis of it, where it's come from, why it's happened, right? The intent, right? Even, and to an extent, even the politics behind it. And obviously understanding that political risk then helps them anticipate, which is a key thing, right? Anticipate those regulatory changes and ensure that the organizations they work for remain compliant. That's the first reason. Second reason is obviously the impact on operations. Political instability often does affect business operations, supply chains, market access, employee safety, right? And by assessing those risks, particularly the risks that we've mentioned, I mean, compliance officers can then help shape and implement strategies to mitigate those disruptions and to put in safeguards. The third reason is around reputation management, right? So as you see, there's an increasing level of accountability for social and ethical impact. So a compliance officer with a keen awareness of that political risk can help protect the reputation of the organization by ensuring alignment with local laws, cultural expectations, and obviously then, reducing the risk of scandals or backlash. Again, it's a very broad question, right? But let me sort of summarize that. So I don't expect there to be a specialist embedded in compliance teams just solely for that, but that skill and attribute is critical, right? And it has to be embedded into the minds of compliance officers from regardless of their backgrounds. Now, having said that, the reality is, I mean, you can't expect everyone to have those attributes, right, Ajay? But I think those attributes need to be ingrained at a leadership level within compliance, particularly, right? The people with the 60,000-foot views of the department and of the risks, particularly from the regulatory standpoint, particularly people who make decisions, people who set and execute the strategies, and who help build a culture.
As I talk to recruiters, the market right now, again, because of all this international uncertainty, the market right now is very hot for political scientists, economists, international relations people, strategic and security studies, intelligence studies, crisis management, sociology, so long as it's devoted to certain parts of the world, so China, Middle East, and in Eastern Europe, that those people are very much in demand right now. And as we turn back, I mean, as we come back to what you were saying, that skill set is very much needed in legal and compliance. Well, that clearly implicates some need for remedial education. What can legal and compliance then do to come up to speed? Or is it just a matter of reading the Financial Times and Foreign Affairs or the Journal of National Security Law? That's another hot field. the Journal of National Security Law, the Journal of Intelligence Affairs. What do they need to do to come up to speed? Because it's not just a matter of keeping up with the news, which they need to do now, but in terms of developing that skill set, I'm wondering, what kind of remedial education would be required for that?
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think you stole my thunder with that statement already, right? Because I was gonna put in a bit of a half joke there, which is, you need to start by just reading the newspapers and paying attention to what's going on in the world, right? Um, you know, uh, but the reality is, not everyone's got the aptitude for it, right? But yet it's still an important attribute. So question is how the question isn't about the remedial education. The question is how do we find the right people, right? Uh, one, and how do we ensure that our existing people with the right level of acceptance or ability to learn, incorporate that into their existing suite of skills, right? So the number of ways, and look, none of this is going to be revolutionary or sort of earth shattering, right? I mean, you know, um, education and training. I'm just going to put that one out there. But it's so cliche, right? As you mentioned right at the beginning, I graduated with a double degree. One of it was in political science, but that didn't really.
Very, very different fields, I might add. One is
Yeah,
the left brain, one is completely right brain. But I mean that you could bring the subjective and the objective to the objectivity of numbers and finance and the subjectivity of culture and theory and
right.
ideology. I mean, it's a very
No,
powerful mix,
no, it
and
is.
it's done you
It
well.
is. I'm glad you mentioned that because when you're going through those courses, as a young adult, you don't appreciate it. Do you know what I mean? It's only much later on in life, and you sort of look back and you look at what you've actually done, and you realize, oh my God, that was actually completely relevant to what I'm doing now, right? And to this whole topic that we're discussing. So, I'll just dwell on that a bit, and then I'll continue answering the question. So for me, at a university level, right, those two degrees, whilst it looks completely yin and yang, right? It was actually very complimentary. Now, I'll simplify the answer a little bit more, right? I mean, look, my mornings were basically spent in the School of Business, right? Understanding laws, regulations, and so forth. But my afternoons were spent in the School of Social Sciences, questioning those laws, right? Applying the level of critical thinking and original thought. You know what I mean?
What are the social costs and consequences of those laws, the
Absolutely.
practical that comes with
Absolutely. And,
it?
and
Yeah.
more importantly, Ajay, listening to all the other students with their own opinions and ideas, right? In the School of Social Sciences, right? And it gives you so much more perspective, and so much more dimension to some of these laws because then you realize, all right, then you realize, oh, maybe I've been thinking about it too much. I've been thinking too much of it in a silo when there were 3, 4 other factors I should have looked at it, which would have changed my answer completely or my conclusions. Do you know what I mean? Now going back to the remedial education, the couple of things. So obviously education and training, we just covered that. Um, you know, Again, this is going to be cliche, right? We talk about reading the Financial Times. For me, I just simply put it as staying informed, right? There should be absolutely no excuse for us in this digital age. It's 2025, right? To not have our fingertips on the pulse of what's going on this planet, right? In fact, we're inundated with news sources, reports, analytical pieces from reputable organizations, right, that focus on such developments and risk assessments. Some of it you have to subscribe to, but most of it's open source, right? And what's open source is pretty good enough for me. And for me, it's just a question of reading. You know what I mean? And sadly, I find that is a bit of a skill that's kind of getting a bit diluted these days. People just generally tend to stop at the headlines and then not go any further. But there's so much depth to reading that if compliance officers actually spend the time, and to be fair to them, they don't have a lot of time, right? They spend the time. It's actually a lot more you can learn. The third, obviously, is around network and collaboration. It's one of my favorites because that's how I learn My primary source of learning is from other people, just listening, right? As the old saying goes, it's a proven science, right? You don't learn unless you listen. If you're talking at the same time, you're not actually learning. So for me, listening to other people who are smarter than me, right? People who've got different, challenging views to me, uh, and engaging with these professionals, in related fields, such as risk management, public policy, international business, politics, and so forth, um, make a huge difference. But you'll be surprised, a lot of us don't live in those circles, or our Venn diagrams don't overlap, right? The fourth is around scenario planning. Um, Practicing developing and analyzing scenarios, anticipating political developments. This can help compliance officers, again, become more adept at identifying risks and planning for contingencies, and obviously cross-functional learning, right? Within their own teams, working closely with teams in legal, public affairs, strategic planning, to gain broader understandings, basically, of, how political risks intersect within their various business functions. And this level of collaboration can definitely enhance the perspective on compliance challenges.
It's interesting because I've often found the best stuff, increasingly, it ends up behind a paywall. But again, you've got to invest in yourself, and it's money well spent. And I've told, young students, what should they read? Well, I tell them what I read, which is, you're in Hong Kong, so you've got to at least pay attention to the South China Morning Post. It's not the paper it was under Murdoch's watch. In the 90s, I felt I would learn something every day when I read it, but I don't feel that way about it anymore. But it's a paper record, and it's a one paper town, so you got to know what's happening in your town. Global, you got to read the FT. It's been the paper record, according to global bankers, for over a century. It's never been the journal. It's always been the FT. So you got to read the Post, the FT. And in terms of international, if you read foreign affairs, the ideologues in Washington, before they put things into policy, they write it in foreign affairs. If you read foreign affairs, foreign policy, the FT, the Post, you're ahead of, I'd say, 95% of the people on planet Earth. And I would eschew uh, Bloomberg Business Week, or The Economist, because you know the folks at The Economist, they don't use bylines. It's the notion that the magazine, the publication, speaks with one voice, but danger is it enables 20-something-year-olds with little and no life experience to wax on like they're experts. But anyway, I don't want to speak too much on that. But in the time we've got left, is there anything you feel you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
No, no. First, I'd just like to agree with everything you just said. Particularly that last bit on, just making sure that we stay informed and we keep our content up to date. I'm like you, Ajay. I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to reading the news as well. But that's the whole point. You're reading it and you're challenging it, right? It doesn't mean you have to accept it for what it is, but it's a basis for you to form a baseline and then form an opinion, as opposed to just reading it and regurgitating it, right? So I want to agree with that first. And lastly, I want to sort of just mention that it's not just geopolitics that's a relevant skill for compliance officers in this day and age, right? We're moving into an extremely accelerated pace of technology adoption. And I know, again, that sounds so cliche, but if you're at ground level in a country working for a bank, playing, having to handle the actual risks uh, on the ground, you will see that pace and skill is moving at a frightening pace, right? So, watch the space, right? It's, geopolitics is one, technology is not very far behind.
Chad Olsen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ajay.
We're going to be continuing our conversation about the importance of geostrategic risk to lawyers and compliance officers. And joining us in the second half is Mark Nuttall in Dubai. Mark is an executive and geopolitical advisor and strategic deal facilitator with over 25 years of experience in strategic leadership, risk management, and business development. He's held roles at the Metropolitan Police Service in London, Thomson Reuters, where he was a colleague of mine, Interpol, and Hill and Associates. He founded Faustus Consultancy and the Iron Club. Mark offers his executive advisory services working across the Asia Pacific and Middle East and North Africa regions in Europe to drive growth, optimize operations, and facilitate deals and enhance governance. Particularly when it comes to risk management and governance, he has implemented plans focused on risk mitigation and resilience, as well as improving governance standards. He's managed complex investigations and multi-agency operations. When it comes to subject matter expertise, he's delivered advisory services on, of course, governance, compliance, risk reduction, finance, leadership, geopolitics, anti-money laundering, resilience, security, and ESG. And he's provided keynote speeches and mentorship to C-suite and geopolitical audiences. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
That sounds a lot, doesn't it, AJ?
I admired your career from a distance, but we never really had the chance to collaborate too much. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Things I didn't mention. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, no, it's so I started my career in. I come from a humble background, so a very modest one where education wasn't first on the list of priorities. And I originally went into the military in the United Kingdom just for a very short period of time, and into security, just standard security, actually, just bouncing and normal foot guarding and man guarding and matters of that nature. And I kind of earned my risk processing stripes from there. I'm northern in heritage, from the north of England, which is known for being a rather physical area within the United Kingdom. And if you had been doing this podcast 30 years ago, you wouldn't have understood a word I was saying out of my mouth. I've only learned to just about string a sentence together.
A land of many dialects.
A land of many dialects, indeed. So then I went on to the big and beautiful wide city of London, following some security and some labouring matters up in the north of England. And eventually I joined the Metropolitan Police after much ups and downs within London, as we all have when we moved to the big city lights. And I understand kind of the reason why I got engaged in geopolitics, finance, economics, capital raising, and real security and real kind of geosecurity as well, is that I early on in my life I was homeless for a while, and I was still working at the time, but homeless at night, etc. So I understand what it's like to have absolutely nothing, and to get an understanding of what it's like at each kind of a level up the ladder, apart from obviously rarities to get to the top these days, but I'm not doing bad for my humble beginnings. So anyway, I moved into the Metropolitan Police Service. I still had address in the north of England in relation to a familial address, which was a mail address. So thankfully I was able to acquire a place in Her Majesty's Metropolitan Police Service, as it was at the time. And from there, I really learned how to communicate with people, negotiate with people. I had a bit of an art for the law as well, and being able to understand practically how to apply that, because law enforcement is a law practitioner role. It's not just in terms of swinging a stick at somebody. You've really got to understand common law, statutes, and have an understanding of what the court processes are, and be a practitioner of it. And and in that, some of the civil legislation as well as the criminal legislation as well, because eventually I got into financial investigation as well as traditional crime and the basics of being a police officer within the United Kingdom. There is specific powers that can become engaged upon gaining certain qualifications and experience, and I gained those. And as a result, I went into financial investigation as part of my kind of additional toolbox skill set duties. And that enabled me to get further competency in the area, to be able to engage with financial institutions, to be able to engage with senior law enforcement officials, and also senior political individuals as well, because of the operations that I was running when I got further into my career. So that adds that piece to the policing part. I was dealing with organized crime at the end of my career, and very juicy, hard to hit, multi-dimensional international operations and investigations that kind of covered every remit and basis, from individuals that were facilitators, individuals that were funders and fundraisers of crime, and holistically those individuals that wanted to ensure that they were hiding and obfuscating assets. And I had confiscation powers as well, which, when you're in the fields that we're talking to today, is incredibly important, because for law enforcement entities, there's, that, especially within common law jurisdictions, is a balance of probabilities that you've kind of got to get through in civil, yes, but beyond reasonable doubt in criminals. So there's a lot to go on in that. And sometimes those matters don't get brought up within the international framework and community when we're talking about the geopolitics of matters, and how those geopolitical conversations get trickled down to becoming policies in countries, and that middle ground of organizations such as FATF and others that try and drive some of those discussions and agendas to get countries to sign up to certain more kind of homogenistic legislative protocols. And I got picked up by Interpol, not picked up on a red notice, but they employed me within as an officer.
It's Dubai. They're using red notices to go after people that don't pay their bills when they flee.
Yeah, not me at the moment. Don't worry. So yeah, it was over in Singapore that I got hired into. I was executive staff on that. So a criminal intelligence officer within the executive staff quadrant. So I was at the geopolitical level, facilitating conversations with governments, law enforcement, multi-jurisdictional bodies as well, such as the United Nations and others. Everything from NGOs to, sat in the room with prime ministers and presidents, and you name it. So got quite a taste of that, and how to utilize the skills that I gained as a law enforcement officer within the negotiation and communication pathway, because you don't gain that in other backgrounds. It's quite a specific skill for law enforcement, certainly within the UK, to be able to gain. And then post that, along came COVID. And it was time to kind of move on. I got headhunted via Hill and Associates at the time within Singapore, and ran their office, book of business, profit and loss, power of attorney on that. Hill and Associates is an extremely well-known risk management private investigation organization within within Asia, and I was country manager for Singapore with a large multi-million-dollar book of business on there, and growth book of business.
They're well known. They're well known here too. I think.
Yeah,
there was a time when, not to knock Kroll, but Kroll was nothing in Hong Kong compared to Hill and Associates.
Yes. Yeah. Correct. So it was quite. I'm being quite humble with kind of what Hill and Associates was and still is to this day. And now I do executive advisory to C-suite, to family officers and advise on that basis. So heads of families, in relation to exactly what my career has been and what I keep a firm abreast on, which is the geopolitical community, what's coming down the pipeline, what the world looks like today, and what it could look like tomorrow. And it's incredibly important for individuals that are placed within compliance roles, and also chief compliance officers and whoever it may be, even the cashier on the till, to understand what's going on in the world and what might necessarily come forward, because it's going to have an impact not just on your role per se, but on the country as a whole and economically, as we're seeing at the moment from some of the fallouts from certain changes in governance in the West, and also some movements within the center of the world as well. So a lot going on with that. I also partake in capital raises and strategic raises for certain organizations as well. And I'm also the regional head for MidCap, which is an Indian security company as well. And they are very, very strong in India. So I decided to accept their very kind offer as acting as their regional head within MENA as well.
You wear many hats, and it seems like, I mean, coming from the north of England, which is known for being pretty rough, and having worked physical security, but also having been homeless, and as you said, knowing what it means to have absolutely nothing. It seems like you've known what it's like to work security, but you've also known profound insecurity, and to go from, again, humble background to completely different trajectory, now advising wealthy families in the Middle East and in Dubai on the risks they face, including geostrategic and political and economic risk. I mean, I guess, to what extent does that sort of thing, do geopolitics and the risks therein enter into the equation when, say, you're advising a family office?
It's all encompassing, and it can be seen clearly at the moment with the markets. I mean, most markets, as we know, AJ, are based on algorithms. The algorithms sometimes are price riding, but mostly those algorithms watch the change in currency and prices, FX market wise, and linked into the FX market as well. Mostly watching the news, strangely enough. So any decision that's made, whether it be at global level, regional level, or local level, affects the markets. The markets then have an effect on individual businesses and financial institutions. The financial institutions feel the repercussions from the movements of foreign exchange, from tariff changes, from businesses being impacted, all the way down to consumers in the retail market as well, who can no longer either, they've been made unemployed maybe, so they no longer have a salary going into there. Financial institutions are at the whim of geopolitics. In terms of the family offices see geopolitics, and I refer to it in this way, as a matter that is of acute concern, because they need to know where their investments are going to be safest. They need to know where opportunities lie, and opportunities are and will be into the future. Should they really be looking at opening or investing in a project to build a factory in, say, X African country or Y Asian region, or over A in the US, because of certain legislatively and regulatory issuances, or just by the utterance of somebody deciding they want to go down a certain path as Prime Minister, President, Vice President, or even in terms of union officials, for that matter, deciding off the back of some certain action that a government has taken to then go on strike or do whatever. So it is incredibly important and a key factor to most organizations, and to especially the heads of family offices or those with generational wealth, that their generational wealth is going to be secure even across a very magnificent portfolio. Because it used to be the case of you could hedge that portfolio and you could be involved in multiple sectors. But at the moment, those multiple sectors, say for instance, over the past 2 weeks, have been hit with strife. So where do you then go to, and how can you react to it, and what is going to be the future, and how can you take proclamations that then turn into real life legislative process and actions by politicians, groups, and otherwise. And those can, for myself, I monitor what people are saying, what they're doing, how they go about business, where companies are opening, what new project is going ahead, what country's being invested in, etc., to be able to keep abreast of these matters and to be able to understand, for my clients certainly, what the potentiality of those repercussions might be, not just now, but 5-10 years in the future. Because in countries such as this one, regionally, Asia, China, etc., it needs to be generational. It's not about the next year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. It's about the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years, etc. Because it's about the generations, it's about relationships, and it's about family, first and foremost.
Let's look at it from the perspective of a compliance officer or a lawyer or frontline staff at, say, the locale you're in. Why should geopolitics, geostrategy, political risk matter to a compliance officer or a lawyer? Because the nature of what they do is heavily rule-laden. And sadly, It is still perfunctory. It is still largely a tick-the-box exercise in that just the way the rules are, it's a binary proposition. You're either compliant or you're not. And okay, so these people, they're seeing the effects of geopolitical problems, and that because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you're getting a lot more Russians and Ukrainians ending up in places like Dubai. A lot of Russians fleeing. They don't serve. They're opening bank accounts. So you're dealing with it on a basic human level. But in terms of the big picture, what's it got to do with me? How can I even effectuate any change on that level when I'm dealing with the consequences at the micro level, at street level? So again, why does it matter to that? Why does it matter to them?
Yeah, that's great, AJ. And let me take, before we go down the why, I'll also comment upon kind of the compliance industry as a whole anyway. And I see two camps, okay? I see a camp of individuals, as you've just mentioned, the ones that are compliant, want to tick the box, are happy with that process and just looking at today's regulatory environment and applying decisions to that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that, because that is their job. Okay, that is their function. That's what they've signed up to do. That's their job description. Okay. Now, and I'll come on to the reasons why geopolitics are important in a minute for that particular group. But in terms of another camp, there is then another camp that are very vocal in wanting to kind of be, I don't know, semi-quasi police officers of a fashion, that are very vocal and very passionate about the compliance industry and wish to effect a huge amount of change and wish to drive, and I'll put this very loosely because I've got my own thoughts on ethics and all of that, but wish to affect their own brand and their own thought processes of ethical behavior and how that should be implemented kind of holistically and in an enterprise fashion within their particular organization. Now, these two buckets of compliance officers can be at any conference that you go to, but they are specifically two buckets. And there's not many individuals that kind of sit in the middle and gaze. You are either one or you're another. And I've met them within organizations, institutions that want to effect that causal change. Yeah. So I think first of all that needs to be addressed and dealt with. What does today's compliance officer look like? What is the job description for that individual? Should they be an active participant in the business, or should they be a compliance officer, i.e. complying with the rules and regulations at your disposal? Now, secondly, as the kind of part of the question that you asked in terms of the regulatory landscape, let's take here in Dubai, well, the United Arab Emirates or another country that has been grey listed, for example. So FATF is a geopolitical organization. So the Financial Action Task Force is a geopolitical organization. It is funded under Budget 2 of the OECD. It's part of the OECD. It's not funded via core subscriptions. It's funded via special project money. Okay. So with that comes the caveat of whoever funds that directing their donor perspective, I'll place it that way, into the mix to enable FATF to function. Yeah. So there are specific donors, and those donors are the most common donors and were previously country, and I say previously because a lot's changed in the past couple of months. The United States, the UK, Europe, etc., etc. Okay, so there are perspectives from a geopolitical perspective in relation to legislative changes and specific compliant processes that come down from the geopolitical level to countries to then comply with the requirements of those entities. Yeah. So FATF was only ever supposed to be set up as kind of this in your risk-based approach, and that should be the case now, you know, with your risk-based approach and with your culture in country, these are the relevant best practices that enable you to get along. What seems to have been the case over the past 5 to 10 years is actually that's changed a lot in terms of you must pass this mutual evaluation, you must adhere by our rules and regulations, or not rules and regulations, but by our standards. And as a result of that, countries then are added to this infamous grey list. That infamous grey list, there is plenty of matters online in relation to people's opinions on that. But to get off that grey list, they've got to abide by the regulations that get put in place and the recommendations. And you know, the UAE has managed to get off the grey list onto the green list. So there is a level on there, and obviously that's changed the landscape in the UAE in terms of businesses. So now you've got designated non-financial businesses that have got to submit X, Y, and Z through the GoAML portal to the national FIU here. And it's the compliance officers have been put under pressure here to ensure that their institutions are as they are perceived supposed to be by FATF and international organizations of that ilk. So when compliance officers ask me, well, what does it matter? Well, it matters holistically, because if your organization is just ticking the boxes as they are at the moment. Expect mass change when a geopolitical entity comes knocking on the door of your country. And that goes for the UK as well, and that goes for the US and Australia and plenty of other jurisdictions. So take Australia for a moment. Australia, Tranche 2, those discussions have been going on ad infinitum. Eventually, they're pushing Tranche 2 through, and that was through the threat of the mutual evaluation. So when people talk about geopolitics, that is part of the geopolitical chapter.
Interesting. You know, it strikes me that this is such specialized knowledge that it might occur to them, okay, why don't we hire a political scientist, an international relations specialist, and place them in either the legal or the compliance department, or maybe outsource it to a Kroll or a Control Risks or a Mintz Group or a Nardello or a Flint Global or a Navigant or a Protivity, and there's just the names I can rattle off the top of my head, or even just the big four. I mean, or Booz Allen. I mean, they're all offering this type of analysis, this type of intelligence work. Why not bring that knowledge in house with a specialist, or outsource it? Because unless these lawyers and accountants studied this as undergrads or happen to have qualifications in that subject in addition to their professional licenses in their professions, how are they going to be able to bring to bear that specialized knowledge to give effective advice to the higher ups in their organization?
Yeah, of course. I mean, they need to. I mean, if a Control, if a Nardello or one of the others gives that decanted information to them, they still need to understand and know it to be able to provide their specialist recommendations to a board, for example, or to make a decision on, X company or Y company that is infiltrating or utilizing their institution to be able to do X, Y, or Z, money laundering or otherwise. Because it's critically important that when you are doing your job, that you understand kind of every facet of it, that you understand how these repercussions come to bear. It grinds down sometimes to I was a CID officer for many years, as well as being a patrol officer, and then within the UK police force, you move into a lot of kind of roles and jobs, and you wear a lot of hats, and you understand a lot about a lot of functions. Yeah, you're one man with a lot of toolboxes, essentially, which is kind of where my career has ended up anyway. So it's good to have that experience. When you are in that position, one of the first rules I learned at training school is pick up a paper, pick up the news to understand what is going on in the world, what is going on at global level, what is going on at a regional level, local level, and then to a district level as well, so that you get a holistic sense of what is going on around you. Because if you don't know what's going on around you, how can you possibly make a decent, well-informed decision on how to act in the circumstances that you're in at the time? So take the FATF scenario. If you know that the country is going to be mutually evaluated or otherwise, then you review the environment in which you are in. You understand the circumstances that the country might be facing, and hence the institution might be facing as well that you are currently in. So if you are going to expect changes to come because the country hasn't legislated for X, Y, or Z, then you start to do things more proactively in review of that. Yeah. So not necessarily that you start, de-risking the entire book of business, because that'd be crazy for your organization, because your organization is essentially a profit-making entity. It's a business. So what you can do is then review, right, these are what is expected to come. This is the scenario planning that we need to do into the future. These are some recommendations on it in relation to the possibilities that might come out of this mutual evaluation, which we already know are going to happen anyway, because communities in many countries, especially within the compliance communities, are relatively small, no matter the size of the country. And as a result of that, let's put in some scenarios to that and ensure that there's going to be a budget for change, for technology, for people, for resourcing. And then when it gets to that year, then you've got that adequate plan in place to be able to do that. What a lot of people do these days is, instead of kind of working for the company, they're working for their own ethical reasons, for whatever nature that is. But when you're on the payroll of a company, that company should be first and foremost especially as a compliance officer, you should be guarding the massive problems that can come about from being in a financial institution, for instance.
It strikes me that, I mean, you rather wisely obtained a degree in international relations when you did, in security studies. So then what is the solution? I mean, do the banks, do the corporates that employ these lawyers and compliance officers and risk managers have to give them a remedial education within their firms, or do they need to go seek it out? And I mean, and maybe it's not practical for everyone to go back to night school, go back and do a part-time degree either in international relations or strategic or security studies, what once was called war studies.
I mean, it's not there.
College.
No, I mean, AJ, that's not their kind of function. What I would say is pick up a paper. And I say that as a man that's now kind of 30 years into his career, but read the news, understand what's coming, what could possibly be occurring in your country. It's not your role to securitize the organization in full, to understand the insider threats, to understand the cyber threats, to your role as a compliance officer. I said earlier, there's two buckets of these individuals, which is kind of this proactive, ethos-driven, ethical individual who wants to change things and be really passionate on a kind of white knight horse. And there's this other bucket of individuals who just want to get on and do their job. And that is absolutely fine to do. That is your function. There is no problem with that whatsoever. But what I'd say to both of those individual buckets is, look, you need to just read the news, see what's occurring, see what's happening, both not just kind of locally, but globally as well. Just turn on and just watch what's happening on Bloomberg for 2 minutes, because then you'll get an understanding of where the news is as well. Okay, there's a business that's being sold in Japan, or there's an investment that's occurring in Guatemala, and or alternatively, somebody is now being investigated by what was, or what currently is, I suppose, the SEC. And are those individuals on our kind of radar book of business? What are they being investigated for in the US? What does that look like? Has it got an impact on my business? And coming back to that as well, okay, SEC, it looks like it's being dismantled at the moment. Okay, that's got real repercussions to local businesses in Singapore, in Indonesia, in Hong Kong, in you name it. It's got a global impact. And this is what I'm saying. They need to, and they should look at this and be more proactive and be be engaged, because it's not just about the business itself, okay, or the country. If they want to be selfish about this, it's their job as well, as in the safety of their job. Okay. Is the business, because of their actions, going to either gain money or lose money, depending on what their decision is on, I don't know, de-risking a client, for example? Yeah. And if that has had some type of geopolitical connection with it, yeah, i.e., say the SEC is going to be dismantled, so we no longer have to de-risk these clients because there's no longer a nexus, or Russia all of a sudden in 3 months' time gets sanctions dismantled by the United States again, and companies can trade with it. Okay, so that's a huge thing. That's an absolutely huge thing for businesses. For financial institutions at the moment, because they are businesses. Yeah. So the businesses will then want to be opening up. The multinationals will want to be trading again in Russia, either a new setup or reigniting their businesses. How is that process going to take place? Because there'll still be sanctions on from the UK and from Europe and some other jurisdictions. But essentially the main powerhouse, the US, has then withdrawn those sanctions. Okay. So how do they then react to it? And if they're not looking at the news, they're not reading it, they're not geopolitically aware, they're not engaged in current affairs, this is all of a sudden going to come as some type of shock to the system for them. In much a similar way as some people have become shocked by the new president of the United States, or the old new president of the United States actions, because he said what he was going to do before he went into office. If you'd have monitored that, you'd have been able to react in the appropriate, calm way, and you would have planned for it. Okay, you wouldn't have been panicking about, and the markets wouldn't have been going crazy. So I wouldn't say that it's a case of having to get, like an education like mine, or, joining X institute or association or whatever. It's just a simple case of being aware of what's going on globally, taking 5 minutes away from maybe Facebook in the morning and looking at some good, solid news and some good, solid news channels.
The market has never been hotter for poli-sci, international relations, strategic studies, war studies people, particularly if they're also linguists with the Syrian dialect of Arabic, Farsi for Iran, Chinese, Russian. And who would have thought that being a Russian linguist would have made a comeback after the closed war? People thought that chapter was closed. The time we've got left, is there any impressions you'd like to leave our audience with?
I mean, as I stated, the world has become incredibly small. People can now, in effect, time travel, if you will. Technology, like we're doing it at the moment. Previously, if you wanted me to do an interview with you before the advent of Zoom and Skype and online monitoring and recording, I would have had to come up to Hong Kong. That's a day, 2 days, 3 days. We sit down for an hour. We then go and do some more business, whatever the case might be. Okay. Now you can do it from the comfort of my own boudoir. You can take this away and gain insights, and the individuals that listen to this podcast can gain whichever insights they want to take from it. So in that, at the same time, the geopolitical hemisphere and atmosphere is available for most people to absorb instantaneously, but it needs context with it. Okay. It needs to have thought with it as well. So as I was stating, if you go to a channel such as Bloomberg, for example, obviously advocate for the channels as well, but if you go to a channel such as Bloomberg, you will get a review of what the markets look like, some opinion pieces, but mostly contextually based information that you can gain decent insights from and then go and research a little bit further if you are interested in that subject matter, but you get a high level one. What appears to be happening today as well with the advent of some of the generative AI processors, quantum computing, and technology as a whole is that people are utilizing certain AI apps to get and to translate as well global news worldwide, to condense it, to concatenate it, and to kind of gain an analyst team within your pocket that can give you a 5-minute debrief on something. Now, that seems to be the way that a lot of individuals are going about, that those that want to involve themselves in this space and become more informed, that seems to be the way that they are going about business at the moment, is that the Russian analysts that could have been there, or the Syrian linguist, etc. Their translation skills are at core now being functionally replaced, and we'll have to see how far into the future that is valid, how far into the future the right dialect and tone is being used, and not to get false information or information that is contextually inaccurate. But people are wanting to get more information without paying a price for it these days.
But Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, and it's always a pleasure to speak to you.
And to our listeners, until next time.